you ever feel like frolicking through a meadow of flowers while wearing a flowy floral gown? Because same. And in my heavily cottagecore inspired social media feeds, one style that keeps popping up is Selkie gowns. These are flowy, floral, poofy dresses that just feel like if you wear one, you must frolic in the flowers and have a tea party picnic with the fairies. But as much as I would love to prance about in a poofy dress, I have a small budget, and Selkies tend to be out of my price range. However, what I do have is a creative eye and a love of thrift stores. And when I saw this gorgeous curtain valance at the local Value Village, I knew instantly it had to be made into a Selkie style dress. So, let's dive in. I'm starting with the skirt since that's going to be fairly easy. I decided to go with a circle skirt instead of a gathered skirt as it tends to produce a more flattering waistline and optimum swirling capability. I used the tried and true method for measuring of sticking a pin in the measuring tape and pivoting it around to ensure an even measurement. Since this fabric is pretty sheer, I'm making 2 layers of skirt. The outer layer from the floral fabric and an inner layer from the accompanying marbled oceany blue. And it was at this point that I forgot I had a new door on my sewing room and gained an ever so helpful fabric weight. When working with sheer fabrics, the most recommended seam style is the French seam, which encloses the raw edges and leaves minimal bulk. You start with the wrong sides together and stitch along your seam line. Then you trim the seam allowance down, press the fabric flat, and stitch again with the right sides together. Easy peasy. Well, most of the time. The hem on a circle skirt is a little trickier as it is a curved edge, which doesn't always want to sit flat. The best way I've found for this is using a very narrow hem. First by sewing a 1/4 inch from the edge, then using that stitch line as a guide to fold the edge over and iron it down. Then you carefully turn the edge over once more, again just a 1/4 inch, and stitch it into place. And with 2 large circle skirts, that's going to be a lot of stitching, pressing, turning, and more stitching. So while Past Sewing Lydia takes care of that, allow me to take a minute to tell you about the generous sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, productivity, and more. If you've been wanting to learn a new hobby or level up the skills you already have, Skillshare is the place for you. I've already been refining my sewing skills through Bernadette Banner's Hand Sewing Basics and Hand Sewing Level 2. And as a self-taught video editor with a quest for knowledge, let me tell you, the amount of classes they have on topics like cinematography, color grading, and special effects has me so excited about the potential for my future videos. There's also a number of classes on how to engage in creativity while avoiding burnout, which is a life skill I am always looking to improve. So if you want to give Skillshare a try, I have an offer for you. The first 500 people to click the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today and level up that creativity. And now, back to the dress. I'd originally planned to leave the hem just plain and straight, as I felt a ruffle might be a bit much. However, once I tried the skirt on, I realized that it really did need a ruffle to give it that floofy, frolicking effect. Thankfully, I had enough fabric left over after cutting out the bodice that I could make a suitably floofy hem ruffle. And I tell you, with a full-length circle skirt, that's a lot of ruffle. I cut the strips 6 inches wide and did a narrow hem on either side before sewing my strips together to make a big circle. Then I turned my stitch length as long as it would go and ran gathering threads all the way around, making sure to run the thread in multiple stages to prevent it from breaking as I gathered. Then came the prolonged process of gathering all the ruffles down to the skirt. After literal hours of pinning the ruffle down, I stitched in place just above the skirt hem. So with the skirt ready to go, let's talk about the bodice. The pattern I used is McCall's M8287, which calls for a side zipper closure. I wanted to do something a little different. Firstly, because I wanted this dress to be somewhat adjustable. A lot of modern clothing is based around specific measurements, and when our bodies fluctuate, as bodies inevitably do, it can have an impact on the comfort of our clothing. Secondly, I did not want to deal with sewing in a zipper. I really did not want to deal with sewing in a zipper. So instead, I decided to put in a corset back closure. That way, I can decide how snug and tailored I want the bodice to fit, and there's no zippers. This shirt pattern is basically just two pieces, a front and a back. So I turned the back piece into two separate pieces to incorporate the lacing loops. I made sure to mark my changes on both pieces, and after a quick mock-up, I was ready for the fashion fabric. I also cut out the bodice pieces in a medium weight linen as a stable interfacing. Since this fashion fabric is really slippery, I flatlined it with the linen so that they would be treated as one single fabric. For the front dart, I used my new favorite trick, ladder stitching along the lines. This eliminates any guesswork and fiddly pinning, and the dart turns out perfect every time. To make the lacing loops, I cut some narrow strips of the bodice fabric and stitched a narrower seam line. Then I trimmed down the seam allowance and threaded it through itself to be right side out. Then I cut them down to little pieces and placed them on the back bodice pieces. It was rather finicky stitching them all down, but it's going to be so worth it. Then I attached the center back piece. This will gather up as needed when lacing it. The front could then get joined as well. To add some stability to this very wobbly fabric that really likes to fray, I attached some twill tape at the waistline of the skirt, and at last it was time to join the bodice to the skirt. To finish off the neckline, I used a facing made of the same linen as the lining, stitching first all the way around by machine, then pressing it down and finishing the inner edges by hand. Lastly, it was time for some sleeves. Once they were cut out, I added a line of gathering thread so that they'll have a little puff at the top. I did a narrow hem at the bottom, top stitching as close to the folded side of the edge as I could. Then I threaded a narrow elastic through. The sleeves get attached to the arm side and gathered right at the top. Then I braved my machine for this part, stitching the sleeves in place, and we are ready for some frolicking. This was such a fun experiment, and I think it turned out pretty dang cute, if I do say so myself. I love the corset lacing in the back, and I love the ruffle hem, even though I wasn't sure that I would at first. Now I just need springtime to actually show up. The irony of me making a frolic in the meadow dress when there's still literally piles of snow on the ground is not lost on me. But such is life in Canada. So thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and if you want to see more videos like this, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you all soon for more Geekery Meets History sewing adventures. This is not helpful. Are you proud of yourself? You gonna be my pattern weight? Can you please move your butt?